Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Monday, July 13th, 2026, episode 545, and we're going to talk about Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham died. He was a U.S. Senator for 23 years, in the House of Representatives for 8 years, and he was a state representative in South Carolina for 2 years. Might have to do an episode on the age of some of these members of Congress, like Mitch McConnell, who no one has seen in a while, and the fact that the proof of life picture that was released over the weekend to say that he's still alive was fake, right? It wasn't a recent picture if it was a real picture, and so people are wondering. And the fact that he might be dead, and yet nothing can be done about it is just it tells you something about the state of the United States now, that this kind of thing can go on and the people are powerless to do anything. And they can just say anything they want, and we're just supposed to sit here and swallow it all. But anyway, Lindsey Graham was nominated for a fifth term for the Senate. He was 71 when he died, which would mean that he would be 77 by the time he would finish his term. Now, I'm not as old as 71, but uh, I'm not that far away. And uh, I can see that some people who are really healthy may be able to hold office for that long, but I mean, you gotta, there's gotta be a lot of testing going on to see if they are still healthy enough to be able to do the work. I mean, look at Trump. A lot of people are saying that he's in severe mental decline, that he'll say whatever the last person said to him just before he goes on camera, he just repeats that. Right. And everything else just goes out the window. So it's pretty crazy. I always wondered how Lindsey Graham would always be reelected, because he's so anti-America. The policies that he supports results in a worse situation for the United States. I mean, if you want to believe the propaganda, hey, we get to say we're number one, but number one of what? Military spending. Okay, fine. But that doesn't translate into actual victories anywhere. And the average living quality, living standard of people here in the United States is in the decline. And you can tell by the increase in gas prices. But his state is heavy in military contractors, military, uh, um, products manufacturing, right? So South Carolina is really big on that. Plus, they have a lot of apparent NASA type, science type industries there. And so big government is a boon for that state. And so for him to continue to push bigger government makes him popular, um, in his home state. But it's all rah rah war with this guy. And that's how everyone should be able to understand him. In other words, people will make a big deal about how he flip-flops on Trump or whatever, but no, he's extremely consistent. He's consistent about war. And so when Trump was anti-war, he hated Trump. And then when Trump warmed up to the idea of having endless wars, he liked him again, right? And when he's got the ability to be able to whisper sweet nothings into Trump's ear, then all of a sudden he's Trump's biggest fan again. So it appears to be pro-Israel or pro-Ukraine, and maybe he is pro-Israel, pro-Ukraine, but it's pro-war, right? That's the common theme that you should be able to see. He was pro uh, all the wars. Anytime there was an opportunity to murder and blow up a lot of people, particularly innocent people, then he was all about that. He was there. You can bet that you would see his face wherever there was talk about war. And all of this war benefited his state, which is why, they keep voting for him. And they didn't mind the fact that he was always out of the country. I mean, when he died, and just where he died, how he died is a little bit suspicious, up in the air, doubtful. But whatever, he was coming back from Ukraine. I mean, he was in other countries more than he was in his home state, and no one really minded because him doing all of that was for the benefit of his state. There's an expression, de mortuis nil nisi bonum, which is Latin, which means of the dead, nothing but good is to be said. Uh, right. And this is it's credited to uh, Chilon of Sparta, who was a sage, and he also is credited with the militarization of Sparta. So interesting, right? So basically, don't speak ill of the dead. And I guess it, and I was going over it in my head, why would anyone say that? Because the dead can't defend themselves. Right. And so that's why you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead. And, maybe you feel bad for the family that just lost someone, um, you know, and maybe for some reason people think that it's something that's impolite. But if you don't talk ill of the dead, then you just say nice things about that person. And even if they are a bad person, you want to just say nice things, then it creates the perception that this person was a nice person. I mean, can you imagine applying this rule to Hitler or to Stalin? you know, yeah, he killed a lot of people, but hey, he was a great bro. He bought drinks for everybody, and it's just kind of silly. And because you have this "don't speak ill of the dead" mentality, you enable the creation of mythology. You create a perception that really isn't true. And so people begin to think favorably of the person who had passed away. Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, right? Ulysses S. Grant, John McCain. When you only try to say good things, people walk away with a more favorable opinion of these horrible people. But if you didn't want people to speak ill of you, then maybe you should have been a better person when you were alive. It's easy to be nice to people who benefit by your existence and the things that you do. It's easy to be nice to them. But to be nice to everyone, to be able to be fair to everyone, it's impossible in politics, right? In politics, it used to be possible because there was no internet. You could say whatever you wanted based on, your audience, and you can change your message, craft your message according to the audience that's listening to you. And no one would ever know that what you said to this group of people conflicts what you said, what you will say to another group of people, or what you said to another group of people. But nowadays, because of the internet, and the internet always remembers, it's hard to do the same thing. And so in politics, it's you got to choose a side. You got to choose a group that you're going to advocate for, and you better hope that you have enough votes, they're strong enough, they're powerful enough, influential enough to keep you in office. But, so that's the idea. So don't speak ill of the dead, I think is kind of like, I get the sentiment, but it's abused now. And especially in the case of Lindsey Graham. Uh, yeah, he did. I mean, some people might want to share some heartwarming stories, but whenever a person like that does something which appears to be nice, you know that there's something else going on there. Because someone who advocates for murder like that, for killing people all over the world and undermining the stability and security of the United States here at home, is singularly minded. And anything he does serves the goal that he has in mind. And he's a warmonger. Some people would use the word war hawk, but he's a warmonger. He always cheered for war, any opportunity to, kill people, bomb people. He was all about that. And it seemed like death and suffering was something he knew he would never have to endure. And he never considered it. He didn't consider the death and suffering of the people that would receive the bombs, that were on the receiving end of the bombs, or even the people who risked their lives delivering those bombs. And he was, whenever I saw him, and I tried to avoid seeing him, he was filled with glee over the idea of people dying. And you might scratch your head, but then you remember, oh, it's all about dollars and cents for his state, for his constituents. So, as I said before, his loyalty to Trump rose and fell according to Trump's position on the war. Now, some people would say, oh, but he was former military. He knows what he's talking about. He was JAG, Judge Advocate General. Okay. He was an Air Force lawyer. And if anyone knows anything about those video shorts that are up on YouTube where they talk about training for the various armed forces, right? So Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, right? And whenever you get to the Air Force, it's a joke. And so not only is he part of the armed service that doesn't have a lot of physical demand, but he was a lawyer on top of everything else. And so people want to say, oh, he was a colonel in the Air Force. Well, yeah, I mean, if you stay in long enough, you're going to be a colonel. So I don't attach any kind of significance to his time in the military. People in his neck of the woods, that's South Carolina, they benefited tremendously from all of his warmongering. But I do wonder if any of them in the military industrial complex question their industry, question their occupation, question what they're doing. And I don't think they do because back in, I believe, 2011, Ron Paul was down there. They had a presidential debate. It was a Republican primary debate. And when Ron Paul raised the CIA concept of blowback, he was booed, right? So he was trying to explain that all of this war we see everywhere, all the monsters that we see, are the creation of U.S. foreign policy. Everyone there booed him because if people were to believe that, they'd all be unemployed. They'd all have to seek work somewhere else. And it seems that a lot of people there are ideologically driven. Um, so they're extremely hostile to all of the designated enemies of the United States. It's a very simple worldview, simplistic. Everything makes sense, and everything is good if you maintain that perspective, right? Your job, your livelihood, all of your values, the policies. Life is good. I mean, you can do no wrong. The United States is the most righteous nation in the world. But it's also a tip off as to why the military is so behind and why the United States military can no longer project its force, its coercion overseas, because they have such a vested interest in the existing industries. The United States has to hold on to obsolete weapon systems and obsolete strategies and thinking. But Lindsey Graham as a person was pretty disgusting. He was single, and I'll leave the speculation about that aside, although it's pretty open secret. But he was always perfectly groomed, right? His every hair was in place, which makes it a little bit sus, right? I won't go into his ladybugs, but and if you Google that, I warn you, you might not want to. But a lot of people want to, right? So the mythology writing has already started, where they say he came from nothing. His parents had a pool hall, and so his childhood was spent racking, pool balls for the customers. And people kind of say this as if it was a horrible way to live, but they had a business. They were entrepreneurs, and I don't know how much money they made, but uh, if you have a business, you generally tend to make more money than people think, unless you were really bad at managing your money. Uh, but yeah, I think I've talked about that before, about even people who sell $5 handbags on the street in a major city, you know, how much money do they make? And people have no idea. They have absolutely no idea how much a person like that can make in a year. And then people go on to say, well, he was poor when he was young, and he's poor now when he's died. Like he's like one of the poorest members of the Senate. Well, and that depends on who you ask and what they're looking at when they say something like that. But poor compared to me? No, no, he was extremely wealthy. But I have a feeling, and I don't know, this is totally speculation, but he had no kids. He wasn't married. So if he dies, where's all his money going to go? So obviously he put it all either in trust or he already handed it over to members of his family. So I bet if you do research into the wealth of his family, I think they would be on the higher side of things, right? Because you can't be in Congress that long and not have a lot of money, okay? And you know that a lot of people compensated him very well for the way that he votes in Congress as well. So, but I personally, on that note, I personally believe that Congress in Washington, D.C. should have salaries like they have it in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire, last time I checked, like for a lot of the positions in government in New Hampshire, you get $200 per year. And that's the way it should be in Washington, right? These are civil servants, right? They shouldn't be paid well. They're serving us. And so people who are able to make that sacrifice, well, they're the ones who should be serving us in Washington, D.C. Like they should just be given $40,000 a year plus travel expenses. You know, that's the way it should be. Or they should be paid the average working man's salary, right? 50,000 a year or whatever, but not what they're making now. No, they don't deserve it. He's not America first. He's not even pro US because, as I said before, all of the policies he pushed were harmful for the United States. So, because of his warmongering, the US debt has increased because war is the most expensive thing that you can engage in. Not only production of overpriced weapons that the United States has, right? Missiles that are a couple $1 million a pop, uh, but you can't build enough of them, so then they can be overwhelmed by just having more, shooting more weapons on from the other side, right? So they're not even the right weapons, but we're spending so much money for these weapons. Uh, and so therefore, because the world has changed and the way that it fights wars, what the U.S. has is a bunch of targets, right? Especially the ships, the capital ships like aircraft carriers. They're just targets, and when they get too close, they get hit. I saw pictures of the Gerald Ford, which claimed to have a laundry fire. No, it was hit by something. And then all of the bases around the Gulf are wiped out. Bahrain is destroyed. You know, all of these bases are wiped out. And so the US has to keep pushing out further and further in terms of the bases that they're using. So they're using a base in Syria, but that got bombed as well. And there's no way to defend against all of the missiles, right? So all the Patriot missile batteries or THAAD batteries or whatever, yeah, they're not effective, right? They just can't stop the missile attacks. So anyone who's there is vulnerable. Now try to mass troops before an invasion. Yeah, that's a target. There's no way to defend them. And so basically, the US is not prepared to fight modern war, right? Especially if you've been beaten up on primitive, so-called primitive countries. Yeah, you get arrogant, and it caught the United States off guard. But it's something that most people with half a brain could see what was coming. But of course, everyone who is basically taking advantage of all the corruption in DC, they didn't see it. All they cared about was the money, like Lindsey Graham. Planes are even vulnerable. So the refueling air tankers are needed, but a lot of them were destroyed and damaged. So there's fewer to go around. And just think what would happen to the United States when and Israel, countries like Israel and Ukraine, when the dollar collapses. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I've often said in class in college, can you imagine other countries doing what the US is doing now, sneaking into the country, kidnapping a bunch of officials, and then putting them on trial at another country and then executing them? Can you imagine doing that? People doing that? I actually see that happening in the not too distant future. So it's pretty bad. And the policies that Lindsey Graham pushed uh, brought us to this point where you may have other countries like Iran, maybe, get powerful enough to be able to send people in here to kidnap heads of state, high members of Congress, and drag them back into Iran for trials, for war trials, war crime trials, for murdering their president. I can see it. America in the early 1900s used to be very anti-war. People want to call them isolationists, but I did an episode on isolationism, right? Through all of this war, everyone is distancing themselves from the United States. And so the actual isolationist policy is pro-war. So anti-war is not isolationist, it's just pro-peace. And there was such a strong push to stay out of war. Uh, there were amendments that were always proposed in the United States to prevent the United States from entering a war. And so there were lots of different versions. One version, I Googled this, it says 1916 proposed constitutional amendment championed by activists and anti-war advocates prior to World War One required that any declaration of war be put to a national public vote. It additionally stipulated that any citizen who voted yes for war would be legally obligated to volunteer and enlist in the military. And later on, I think before World War II, there was a version called the Ludlow Amendment, and basically it was the same thing, except they didn't say, oh, if you voted war, then you have to go. But the sentiment is there. If you advocate a war, then why should someone who is anti that war be forced to go and fight? Right? It's so ludicrous that you have all these rich people, all these privileged people that can find exemptions not to go into the war, but then can sit there casually while they're drinking their tea or their martini or whatever and say, yeah, yeah, all you poor people have to go and fight. It's so absurd. And so people who advocate a war should be the first ones to be sent over there, right? And you solve two problems at once that way. And people who should be sent overseas should go regardless of age and gender. If you look at Ukraine, right, there was a story of a pregnant woman that was sent to the front. There were people as young as 13 were sent, and men as old as 60s, possibly 70s, were sent to the front because everyone else is dead, right, or privileged enough to avoid going to the front, right? So this is a war also that Lindsey Graham supported. And it's so insane to me. And all of this fighting, all this warmongering for what? There's a line in A Few Good Men, movie with Tom Cruise. It's kind of old, but it's got Jack Nicholson in there. And it's the whole you can't handle the truth, right? And so when Jack Nicholson is exiting the scene, he says, "You have weakened the country. You have weakened the country today." Well, the same could be said to now, but everything is flipped. So I say to Lindsey Graham that he's weakened the country by his constant warmongering. And it's pretty pathetic at this point to believe any of the propaganda that we're listening to coming out of the US government, that the US is in control of anything. The Gulf states are dumping alliance with the United States for China, Russia, and even Iran. Everyone all over the world is ditching the dollar as a reserve currency. And so very isolationist. And I think the only true, and I can't even call them an ally because there is no alliance signed between Israel and the United States. But yeah, they're basically tied at the hip. And so they'll either rise together or go down together. And I think going down is the more likely path that will be taken. Uh, and so now we have countries pushing back. I mean, I've used I've called the United States the bully, and now countries are pushing back. And although Trump will say stuff like, "Oh, I'm going to open the Strait of Hormuz," it comes from this attitude that if the United States says something, everyone should just jump. Um, but everyone else is coming back and saying, "Nah, we won't." And I think the only reason why people even pay attention to anything Donald Trump or the United States does is because of the nuclear arsenal that the United States has, that Israel has. And if they're crazy and insane enough to keep pushing a war that we've already lost, maybe they would use the launch nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons, and that is unfortunate. But that's where we are. And so I'm not sad at all that Lindsey Graham is dead. Um, I think, and I'm a Christian, so I believe that there is probably, I'm almost, I'm almost sure that there's a special place reserved for him in the afterlife. And unfortunately, he didn't get to suffer in this world, but I think he's suffering tremendously now. But that's it for this episode. I will talk to you next time.